Hello, everybody. My name's Ed Pavlik. I'm in Lexington, Kentucky, and I'm with my colleague.
Frank Lawton from London, United Kingdom.
Well, we're here today to do another GYN oncology garage, where we look in detail at certain papers that are of interest in this subspecialty. And so today we're going to look at a paper that comes from the United Kingdom, and it's a good paper. Don't get me wrong there. We're going to look at it in terms of detail and where some of the details are important to the conclusion. So this group, which is a very well-known group, is looking at a continuation of their long-term ovarian cancer screening trial in Great Britain. And it's the title of the paper in Lancet Oncology is Tumor Stage Treatment and Survival of Women with High-Grade Serous Tubo Ovarian Cancer in the UK CTOX trial. And this is an exploratory analysis. Okay, with this in mind, what we have to look at is to say, what is the paper really about? And so what we can say is that the paper looks only at the high-grade serous ovarian cancers. And so it fishes them out of the screening group. And by so doing, it considers really only these cancers. And then it proceeds to analyze these cancers with Kaplan-Meier for survival. The bias of Kaplan-Meier is to actually ascertain survival. Death has to occur, and that's just the basis of that calculation. And that they find one big thing, and that's that the survival benefit does occur in this group of people, namely the high-grade serous ovarian cancers, and that it occurs after 10 years, and it's small. And at its maximum point that they could determine, it's about 7%, and that's after 18 years. In all honesty, this is important because this is a group of people that contains both a small number of early stage disease and a large number of late stage disease in this disease group. Now, I'd like to point out that they are not the first group to find a survival benefit. And I can do that if I can just control my computer. And the first survival benefit of this high-grade serous ovarian cancer was demonstrated by our group in 2018. And basically, this group contains some things that are biased in the Great Britain study. So with this in mind, let me simply say I've said it all about the paper that's just been published. Let me say a little bit about what the typical bias is that we can perhaps look at as a limitation. The way the study was done, it was done as an intent to treat study, which meant that people who did not get screened were included in the screening group because the screening group was defined by randomization. So if we look at the way we had hoped a study like this would go, the MMS group, that's the multimodal screening group, which is both the CA-125 component as well as the ultrasound component, has to really receive the CA-125 screen, followed by triggering the ultrasound screen, which we call TVS, followed by a diagnosis, and then followed by treatment of surgery and chemotherapy. It's possible then, though, that people are in the screening group and they don't get treatment. It's possible that they don't get screened. And so what we have here is, for instance, the people who don't get screened are no different in the screening group, are no different from the people who don't get screened in the non-screening group. And so they average things in a push in the screening group towards things that are happening in the non-screening group. So that's one thing that's happening. And the other thing that's a limitation to this type of approach taken here is the post-screen time, or the time to diagnosis. Now, they've set up basically a trial to recruit for 5 years, or 4 years, excuse me, and then to screen in the dark green here for an additional 7 years. And then after that, to have a follow-up for the appearance of ovarian cancer or the diagnosis, which means that they're allowing a screening event that's positive in 2011 to actually count for a detection up to 3 or 4 years later, which is giving, a lot of time for the protection from screening, if there is one. And likely, they are also giving this extended time for a longer period of time if the screening detection was, for instance, in 2005 or 2006. So essentially, follow-up occurs after the diagnosis. Diagnosis could occur in any one of these years that are in green. And also they're allowing it to occur in their study to be put into the screening group as positive. So I think this is, a real push of a real extension of going too long to accredit a screening diagnosis with a screening finding. So with that in mind, let me say that I think that this study has the material to go back and say, okay, who really, when they were put into the randomization group called the screening group, who really never got screened? For analysis, let's take them out. Who never got treated? For analysis, let's take them out. And who was, who really was early stage disease, and how many of them were there in the whole screening group. And clearly in the selected group for high-grade serous ovarian cancer, there was only a handful of people with early stage disease. So Frank, that's my summary of what's going on here. I think there's promise in the data that's already been collected, and there's promise in this report, which sort of says that what's happened since the study started, there were enough people, even with the small amount of early stage disease, to receive a benefit if they had serous ovarian carcinoma from detection. And we've seen a little bit of this, not in a screening sense, but there are multiple reports in the literature of 3B not doing as well as 3A, and certainly not doing well as stage 3C. So that's it for me. Frank, what do you think?
Yes, I mean, what I liked about this study, I think they've been honest. Ian Jacobs and Usha Menon, both of whom I know, have got this huge database. It's probably the biggest database of ovarian screening in the world. But rather like you've just said, I think they are beginning to, or they want to select people, part of the population who will benefit from screening rather than the whole population. And it's all very well saying, well, we're only going to let's just look at high grade G3 serous tumors and see whether that makes an impact. And clearly, if I were someone who was involved in healthcare economics, and someone like Ian or Usha were coming to me saying, we have this plan to screen a population, I would be very anxious and probably not want to sign off that this is a cost-effective procedure. The problem, as we all know, is that ovarian cancer is not common enough to really screen. And I think the other thing that they've picked up, and I think this is that progression-free interval is not a surrogate for survival. It was never designed to be. If you look at all the data, all the statistics on PFI, it was never going to be that if we improve PFI, we will improve survival. That's just not how it works. And of course, the other thing is that since the majority of patients with ovarian cancer will die of their disease, progression-free interval actually is a misnomer. It's we don't know you've got the disease interval. And I don't know how we measure that. Is it CA125? Is it symptomatic? Is it ultrasound, CT, other imaging? This idea that PFI in some way predicts overall survival, I'm not surprised in the end that it doesn't really make that much difference. I think the other thing is that if I were a patient and I was going to be involved in some sort of screening, and someone told me that, well, the chances of you being alive at 19 years is 7%, and I'm already in my 60s, I'm not so sure I'd be taken with that concept. People die of other things before they're going to die 20 years later of an ovarian cancer. And I think the other thing that they pick up on, and I don't know whether it's genuine or not, but they do say that between the screening interval, which was 2001 to 2011, I think, there have been improvements in the more radicality of surgery, different chemotherapy, chemotherapy regimens, etc. So I still do not believe that ovarian cancer is a screenable disease. I don't think it's common enough in the population. And I think even this wonderful study, and they worked very hard on it, you've got to find a real small subset, which is high grade advanced disease, before it's going to show any real advantage. And I'm not so sure that, and they admit it, they say that the advantages are very, very small. 6.9% in 19 years is nothing, unfortunately. That's not where any benefit from the management of ovarian cancer is going to occur. It's not going to be in screening at the moment, because we don't have the tools.
That's right. I mean, I see that you have a good argument here. The one thing that's a mystery out of the paper before this is why there was not a better survival for early stage disease.
Yes.
And I think that has to do with the intent to treat problem, as well as how late after the screening the actual disease appeared. And certainly, if a woman was screened today, she got ovarian cancer, and that was any type of screen that looked like it was a positive, but for reasons that had to do with her personal choice, didn't appear for either a confirmatory screen or imaging or treatment or for surgery, and then had a survival interval of X. That survival interval should not be, in my mind, treated in the screening group, because she really didn't get expeditious treatment or
Sure,
anything like that. And I think they have the possibility of examining that that question, and to see really, even though it's possible they have to admit it'll be underpowered, nevertheless, I think it's worth doing. So, in the end, and I will say also, this is not this paper, but they have published a paper we're not considering today that's rather recent, where they've gone back and used this approach on storage samples and found out that they were seeing positive results that would go back to being able to detect ovarian cancer 10 or 12 years earlier than it really appeared. And I think that paper has to see the light of day and be examined, which we're not doing today. But I think they have some of the tools, and I think if they overcome some of the liabilities of doing this intent to treat approach, they really may have something there.
Yes, I would agree. They have a huge database, and providing they interrogate the database appropriately, and obviously that's how you, I, or anybody else will interpret it. But there are data here that need to be further interrogated and further reported. When you've got 200,000 patients on your database, it's likely that you're going to produce something that it is worthwhile, and I'm sure they will continue. But as I've said before, I think the idea of a population screening for ovarian cancer, I think, is dead in the water. You cannot do that. In UK Tox and UK Fox has tried to look at more and more as smaller and smaller subgroups, familial cancers, etc., and they're still not been able to actually show that screening makes that much of a difference. Here is a huge database with the intention to treat. There may be a slight survival advantage. That's fine. It's not very big, but it's the beginnings of further. And as I say in the paper, it's actually probably not just the stage of the disease. Stage, let's face it, stage is because we don't know the prognosis. We used to stage tuberculosis. We used to stage infectious disease. Stage 1, you'd live. Stage 4, you would die. End of. We only stage diseases because we don't know the outcome. And stage has become so much of the shibboleth of ovarian cancer, and it's actually to do with tumor biology and possibly the chemotherapy or the following treatment that they get, but it's more to do with the biology of the tumor, I think, than whether the mass is confined to the ovary, confined to the pelvis, extraperitoneal, liver, whatever. It's all. That bit's all man-made, and we categorize by stage because we don't actually know about the biology of the tumor. And of course, that's what staging does. That's what ultrasound does. It stages disease. It has nothing to do with the histology of disease. An ultrasound cannot tell you whether you've got a serous carcinoma or a borderline tumor. It just says you've got a lump on your ovary, or you've got a lump on your pelvis, or you've got a mental disease, or whatever else. And that's why I think this paper is important. It's actually saying there's more to it than just taking an image of your pelvic disease. That's my feeling, anyway.
Let me ask you a quick question. Say we have this lady you were alluding to a few moments ago. She's on the older side, and she has some comorbidities. She has a cardiac issue. She may have other issues. But if I were to say to her, we should go ahead and screen you so that you have the benefit of dying from a quick disease like kidney failure or cardiac failure, as opposed to a terrible disease.
Yeah.
Then screening may have a role.
Well, yes, but only to give her the opportunity to say whether she wants to be screened for that disease or not. Absolutely, I would agree entirely. Do you really want to be screened for disease at the age of 70-something when the chances of you dying of it, as this paper has shown, 6.9% in 19 years. You'll be 90 by that time. Something else may have taken you on. I think that's quite important. And from a purely from financial point of view, that is very, very important. Who are we going to screen, and why should we be screening them? It's rather like, and I know this is actually going slightly, but with the COVID epidemic, in Great Britain, the government decided to give COVID vaccinations to the older population. The older population doesn't pay taxes, doesn't work, etc., etc. And certainly the older people I spoke to said, I wish my grandchildren or my children were given the COVID vaccine beforehand. When you're screening a population of post-menopausal 70-year-old women for a disease that may or may not kill them in 20 years' time, I think that's a very important question. Not for us, though.
Yeah, I do think, but we are talking about sort of two different,
of course,
environments.
Yes.
In the U.S., the problem is financial toxicity, the cost of medical care being passed on to the middle class and people losing their homes or going bankrupt. And the way you described it, of course, is passing on the brunt of the expense to the whole tax-paying population, except for those who are too old to be paying taxes or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and obviously the whole point of screening for a disease, has economic impacts as well. This paper, and I don't know, to be honest, whether Ian and Usha have mentioned addressed this, but the expense of screening for this 200,000 people, ultrasound, CA125, whatever, for life saved. I know that there are data on it, but I haven't seen it recently. You know, that's got to be taken into consideration as well. The burden of healthcare in the UK is paid by all of us. The burden of healthcare in the United States is only paid by some of you. I don't know how it works particularly. And if someone was saying, well, we're going to screen all 78-year-old ladies for ovarian cancer, I might argue that my tax money should actually go on screening or healthcare for diabetes or whatever. It's a very difficult question, and we've obviously swayed a little bit from what we were going to talk about earlier, but I think it's important. And you know, and all screening programs have got to address this, haven't they? That you can't pretend that screening is completely separate from the rest of healthcare, and as it always will be.
That's right. And to Usha and this group's credit, they have provided cost estimates at the national level in their, I think, 3-year-old publication. That
okay, right, yeah,
that type of thing.
Yeah,
so I mean that, you know, they've done due diligence. The only one you could argue that cost to the country or to the Commonwealth is going to be different than to a research study. But that's neither here nor there. Well, Frank, we've done it again. And we're going off to celebrate the death of a turkey tomorrow. It's Thanksgiving.
Oh, yes, Thanksgiving tomorrow, isn't it? Yes.
So, well, we're looking forward to it. So I'm grateful for all the things, especially you, that we can do this every month.
Absolutely.
So,
and we'll see you before Christmas.
That's right. We will. Okay.
Take care.
Okay, Frank.
Take care, my friend.
Take care.
Bye-bye now.